Hello again. In this lesson we'll start with getting more familiar with the various windows in Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition. We'll work with many of the standard user interface controls from the toolbox. And finally we'll modify the properties of those controls to change the way they appear and behave within our applications. Now throughout this series of lessons I'll be referring to this program's user interface as an IDE. An IDE stands for Interactive Development Environment. It's a genre of software that assists you in creating your own programs. Now there's a lot of IDEs out there depending on the vendor and the programming language, but if you want to create Visual Basic applications, then Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition is the default IDE, especially if you're just getting started. As you advance and become part of a team and a corporate environment, your company may supply you with Visual Studio 2005 Professional or an even more advanced version that integrates with Team System. Now that's a little down the road at this point, but I wanted you to understand what an IDE is and the relationship between Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition and its big brother Visual Studio 2005. A good IDE will provide lots of tools that help you to create applications more easily. Now in the previous example in Lesson 1, we just dragged and dropped a button control from the toolbox into place on a visual designer. Now what we saw on the designer surface looked exactly like the form that the end user would see whenever running our application. We didn't have to write code to draw the form, to make it the correct size, to position it on the screen. We didn't have to write code to position the button at the exact spot on the form, but something wrote that code because virtually everything that you do in Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition, whether you realize it or not, is writing code for you. So when we double-clicked on the button to write code to display the message box, the act of double-clicking on the button generated code. You remember the what we call the event handler, which we were going to talk about later? And these are just a few examples of how the IDE helps you to write applications much faster than if you were to try and type all the code yourself into Notepad, for example, and then compile it manually, which you can do. Now we'll talk about this more in a moment, and we'll actually look at where this code resides that's generated automatically for you in a future lesson. Now there are many tools in Windows in Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition. Some of them help you write code or to configure aspects of your application. Some tools help you find your mistakes. Some tools help you search and locate code that you've written. But all these tools have to appear somewhere on the screen at some point so you can interact with them. And Microsoft has done a pretty good job of putting these tools in clever places so they appear only when you need them and then they get lost whenever you need them to get out of your way. So to demonstrate this, what I want to do is create a new project called Lessson2. I'm going to select New Project from the File menu. Make sure that Windows Application is selected from the Install Templates, and then change the name to Lessson2 and click OK, just like we did in the previous lesson. Now that I have my lesson, let's take a look at how to work with the windows that appear within the IDE. And let's take the toolbox for an example. Notice that whenever I hover my mouse cursor over the toolbox tab on the left-hand side, that the toolbox jettisons out, and now I can select which control that I want to use from the list of controls within the toolbox. Just like we saw in the previous lesson, I was able to just drag and drop a button and put it onto my form. That works great if I only need to put a couple of controls onto my form. But this whole process of hovering my mouse cursor over and then waiting for it to pop out and then finding the control that I'm looking for can be burdensome if I need to do that for 10 or 15 controls. I have to wait, find the control I'm looking for, wait for it to close, go back, and so on. What I can do in this case is to turn off the auto hide feature by going to the little pin icon at the top of the menu bar and selecting it, and notice now that it's fixed into place. And as a result, my main area kind of moves over to the right a little bit to allow for this fixed window to be in place now. If this doesn't work for me, if I need the toolbox in a different area, what I can do is click on the menu bar and drag it off of its default spot and just move it anywhere onto the interface. And notice whenever I drag this around that these little visual helpers that will help me find the right spot in order to drop it. So if I want to put it back in place, all I need to do is hover my mouse cursor now over this left-hand column icon, and notice that a little blue shaded area shows me where the window will actually be placed once I drop it there. Or I can do this against the top or against the side. And when I go to this side, notice that I get some options here. I can put it here, or I can put it there, and so on. Now I'm just going to put it back into place for now. Now over here on the right-hand side, we have a different representation. Notice that the window is pinned down, so there's no auto hide, but we have these tabs that are at the bottom, and so right now I see the Solution Explorer, but I can also view other windows by clicking on the little tabs in the bottom of each section. And you'll notice that this column is split up into two rows or two areas. I have the Solution Explorer and the data sources windows docked in this upper section, and then below it I have this properties window. Now I could rip this off as well and place it along with, whoops, I didn't do it quite right there. Let's do it one more time. I can try and place it with the rest of these windows here, and notice now that the Solution Explorer takes up the entire right-hand column. The Properties window, when I click its tab, takes up the entire right-hand column, as does the Data Sources tab. And to get this back into the original position, what I want to do, whoops, is be careful here, and just grab the tab and then find its spot and put it back into place. So now we have the Solution Explorer, the Data Sources, and the Properties window back into its original configuration. So there's a lot of flexibility here to move things around and put them in places where they make the most sense for us. And we can dock them against the left, the right-hand side, the top side, or the bottom side. Now it's important to note that you can only move a window if it's already pinned down. So for example, if I were to remove the auto hide by unpinning this window, and now it's auto hiding again, I can't drag this from its place. I have to first pin it down and then drag it away, and then I can drop it back into place if I want to. Now I've only demonstrated the left and the right hand side. However, there's other windows that have an affinity for different areas for a more horizontal alignment within the IDE, such as the Errors window. And to find this window, I'm going to select the View menu and click the error list, and notice that it displays in dock to the bottom. If I were to try to put this, for example, over here, this wouldn't really be prudent for it to be here because there's so much information that's displayed in a more tabular format, and I would be missing most of the information off to the right-hand side. I'd have to scroll to use it. So it's not always prudent or expedient to put some windows in certain places. They have an affinity for a certain area, and that's probably where we should leave them. And to close a window, all we'll do is select the Close button, the X, in the upper right-hand corner. And as I showed earlier, if you need to access it again, you can go to the View menu and find just about any of the windows. The toolbox, for example, you can see here we have the Solution Explorer, the Database Explorer, the Properties window is somewhere here as well. We can find all of these windows here in this View menu. So if you ever lose them, you can get back to them through the View menu. Okay, that should be enough for now. Let's move on to learning more about creating cool user interfaces for our WinForms applications. In the previous lesson, we've already seen how you can drag and drop controls from the toolbox onto your form, but you can also just double-click a control, for example the button, and it will appear on the form. Also, notice in the toolbox that the controls are nicely arranged by their type. We have, for example, the common controls, container controls, menus and toolbars, data, components, printing, dialogues, and so on. And as I've just demonstrated, you can collapse or to hide the groups of controls that you won't use very often, or you can expand the ones that you'll use often by using the little plus and minus buttons that toggle on and off to the left-hand side of the grouping within the toolbox. Now we'll be looking at the common controls and the menus and toolbars for the remainder of this video and pretty much throughout the remainder of the videos within this series of lessons. Now once a control has been placed on the form, you can also move the control around, you can resize it, and you can try to position it, and notice that you get some automatic features within the Visual Basic 2005 Express Edition that allows you to align things in a very nice way. Notice here that I get this little blue line that comes out so that I can align the left-hand sides or the right-hand sides, the tops or the bottoms, if I can get it to do that. Yes. Let's go ahead and just delete this button off by selecting it and then hit the delete button on our keyboard. You can see that it's gone now. Now, if you really want to control or change how your control looks and how it functions, you're going to have to write some code. Now, do you always have to type in the code yourself? Well, not always. And that's where the Properties window comes in. The Properties window allows us to change the properties, how the control appears, its text, its color, its size. We can control how it functions. Can it be dragged and dropped? Can it be resized as the form is resized? Should it be disabled? And a lot more. Each control has some common properties,